From the very beginning, my life carried a label I never chose. While most children are greeted with affection and encouragement, my parents greeted me with scorn. To them, I wasn't Aaron. I wasn't even their son in any meaningful sense. I was simply the dumb one. That was the title stamped on me before I could properly read, before I had the chance to prove who I was or who I could become. At first, I didn't understand it. I thought maybe it was a joke, a name that would fade as I grew older. But as the years stretched on, I realized it wasn't temporary. It was their truth. My identity in their eyes was fixed, and no matter what I did, I could never erase that stain. Meanwhile, my older brother Darren lived in an entirely different reality. He wasn't just celebrated, he was worshipped. To my parents, Darren was royalty, the prodigy, the genius, the golden son destined to carry our family name into history. Every achievement he reached was displayed like a trophy for the world to see. His victories were family victories. His glory was shared by all of us, except me. I remember the first time I saw the difference in the way we were treated. Darren solved a math puzzle before anyone else in his class, and my father bragged about it for weeks. Relatives called him the future of the family. My mother smiled like she'd birthed a miracle, but when I brought home a small drawing I'd worked on for hours, something I was proud of, my father didn't even look at it. He waved his hand dismissively and muttered, "Focus on something useful." My mother followed with a sigh and a quiet question. "Why can't you be more like Darren?" That was my childhood in a single moment. His brilliance, my invisibility. The older we grew, the wider the gap became. Darren was praised for intelligence, discipline, and charm. I was scolded for existing in his shadow. Family gatherings turned into stages where Darren shined and I faded into the backdrop. If Darren was light, I was the darkness everyone pretended not to notice. But the hardest part wasn't the comparisons. It wasn't even the cruelty disguised as humor. It was the silence. That deep, cutting silence when I longed for recognition and received nothing in return. When my father looked at Darren, his eyes gleamed with pride. When he looked at me, his gaze was flat, impatient, as though I were wasting his time simply by standing in the room. Even as a child, I sensed the truth. I didn't belong, not in their eyes. Not in their vision of what the Vale family should be. Darren was the heir, I was the heir, and so, I grew up in a home where love was distributed like prizes, and only one contestant was ever allowed to win. By the time I was old enough to notice the rhythm of our family, the pattern was already set in stone. Darren spoke, and everyone listened. I spoke, and the room shifted to another subject. It didn't matter what I had to say, my words were background noise. At family dinners, the mahogany table felt like a stage. My father sat at the head. Darren to his right, my mother leaning close enough to beam at every syllable that left his mouth. I sat at the far end, almost out of sight, a silent witness to their admiration. It was there, at that table, that I first learned silence could be safer than speaking. If I tried to join the conversation, I'd see eyes roll, hear a sigh, or worse, feel the sting of my father's sarcasm. He had a way of cutting me down in fewer words than most people used to greet a stranger. One night, when Darren announced he had been accepted into an advanced science program, the room erupted with clapping and toasts. My father lifted his glass and declared, "That is what it means to be a Vale, excellence, leadership." Then he turned to me with a smirk sharp enough to pierce bone. "And Aaron, you passed gym class. Small victories count too." The laughter that followed carved into me deeper than I let them see. My mother was subtler but no less damaging. Her words were like raindrops, soft, constant, and impossible to ignore. She'd hand me a plate and whisper, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" She'd fold laundry into my arms and add, "You should try harder, Darren makes it look effortless." She spoke it casually, as if she were giving advice, but each remark was a stone sinking into me. Over time, they weighed me down until I could no longer lift my head without shame. Darren thrived under this dynamic. He didn't just accept the role of golden child, he relished. Tall, confident, and sharp-featured, he walked through life as though it already belonged to him. He enjoyed reminding me of his superiority, often with an audience. When I was 16, I worked evenings at a local diner, saving for things I knew my parents would never buy me. As I left for work one night, Darren lounged on the couch, my parents laughing at his side. "Don't forget to wipe the grease off your hands before touching the door," he called out. "We wouldn't want the neighbors thinking the Vale family keeps a servant." Their laughter followed me out the door, heavy as chains. Living in Darren's shadow wasn't just about being overlooked. It was about being defined by his brilliance. Every compliment he received was another reminder that I was loved. Every cruel joke he made was validation for my parents that I was exactly what they claimed, the dumb one. And as the years passed, I began to wonder if they were right. Amid the constant comparisons, there was one person who saw me differently. My grandfather, Eldon. He wasn't like my father, who measured worth in profit margins and prestige. He wasn't like my mother, who valued perfection and appearances. Eldon believed in people. He believed in potential that couldn't always be tallied in numbers or paraded at parties. When I visited him, I wasn't the forgotten son. I was simply Aaron. His home was quieter than ours, tucked away from the constant noise of ambition. The porch creaked when you stepped on it, and he liked to sit there with a cup of tea, staring out at the trees as if they whispered secrets only he could hear. I would join him, and unlike the rest of my family, he never filled the silence with judgment. He filled it with questions, not about grades, not about achievements, but about me. "What made you smile this week?" he'd ask. "What do you dream of doing when you're older?" They were simple questions, yet they felt revolutionary, because no one else had ever bothered to ask. One afternoon, I confessed that I didn't think I would ever be like Darren. My words tumbled out clumsy and heavy, the way insecurities often do. Eldon leaned closer, his weathered face calm, his eyes steady. "Aaron," he said, "never mistake their blindness for truth. Just because they cannot see your worth does not mean it isn't there. You have something Darren does not. One day when the moment comes, you will know it. Don't let them convince you otherwise." I didn't fully understand then, but his words sank into me like seeds that waited in silence, buried deep, until the right time to grow. Eldon also told me stories about how he built the family empire. Not the glossy version my father paraded in speeches, but the hard reality of sweat, failure, and persistence. He started with nothing but determination. He failed more times than he succeeded, but he kept going. "The company," he said, "isn't just a pile of money. It's a reminder that strength comes from resilience." That's what I wanted this family to remember. But that wasn't what my father remembered. Victor saw the company only as proof of dominance, a crown to secure his pride. Darren, groomed under that mindset, believed it was his birthright. I sat with my grandfather, and wondered what it meant to carry a legacy in a different way. Whenever I left his house, I felt lighter, as if I wasn't completely defined by my family's cruelty. Eldon gave me something no one else did: belief. He believed I had a future worth waiting for. At the time, I thought his encouragement was just kindness, the way grandfathers soften their grandchildren's wounds. What I didn't know was that his words weren't comfort alone, they were a promise that one day, I would understand why he chose to believe in me. The older we grew, the more the separation inside our home solidified. Darren wasn't just the favorite son, he was the project. My father trained him like a soldier, preparing him to carry the family's name and fortune. Board meetings became Darren's classroom. Business deals became his rehearsals. By the time he was 15, he was already shadowing my father at company dinners, absorbing every detail of the empire he was meant to inherit. I, on the other hand, wasn't invited. My role was to mow the lawn, run errands, or stay out of the way while the real future of the family was being sculpted. If relatives visited, my father paraded Darren in front of them like a polished trophy. "Look at my son," he'd say proudly. "Sharp as a blade, born to lead." When those same relatives turned to me, the compliments were half-hearted at best. "You're tall," they'd mutter, "or at least you have a good smile." It was as if they didn't know what else to say. Even holidays reflected this divide. At Christmas, Darren's gifts were wrapped in layers of care. The newest gadgets, tailored suits, even a watch imported from Switzerland. My gifts felt like afterthoughts: socks, stationery, or once a self-help book with a title that stung: How to succeed when you're not naturally gifted. The message was clear. Darren was being equipped for greatness, while I was being reminded of my shortcomings. When Darren's acceptance letter to Harvard arrived, it was treated like a national holiday. My mother threw a party the very same night, catered food, champagne, and a house full of guests who toasted his brilliance. Strangers congratulated me, assuming I must be proud. But behind my polite smile, I felt invisible. Their words washed over me like background noise because the truth was simple. I wasn't part of the celebration. I was a prop in Darren's story. Meanwhile, I worked quietly, holding down part-time jobs that no one in my family cared to notice. Summers for Darren were spent in Europe, adding to his list of impressive experience. Summers for me meant stacking boxes in warehouses, scrubbing dishes, and saving money in silence. My parents dismissed it as wasted time. "You'll never build a future flipping burgers or sweeping floors," my father sneered once. What he didn't realize was that those jobs gave me something Darren had never learned: resilience. Still, every family gathering reminded me of the gap between us. My father's words echoed whenever I faltered. "Aaron, you'll never amount to anything." My mother's sighs trailed behind me like shadows. And Darren's laughter was the soundtrack of my failures. The divide wasn't accidental, it was engineered. My father was molding Darren into his reflection, while I was treated as the blemish to be hid. What none of them understood was that in their neglect, they were forging something different in me. Not brilliance polished by privilege, but strength carved from silence. The day of Darren's graduation felt less like a family milestone and more like a coronation. From the moment the sun rose, my parents moved with rehearsed precision, as though they had been waiting their entire lives for this event. My mother, Muriel, barked instructions at the staff about floral arrangements, seating charts, and catering. My father, Victor, stood in the foyer, adjusting his cufflinks with the confidence of a man about to deliver a victory speech. As for me, my role was clear: stay quiet, stay invisible. My suit wasn't new, it was one of Darren's old ones, tailored just enough to fit, though the seams tugged slightly when I moved. My seat at the ceremony was far from the stage, buried in the back rows where no one important would notice. I watched from a distance as Darren walked across the stage in his flowing gown, the spotlight following him as his name echoed through the auditorium. The applause was thunderous. My parents stood proudly, clapping until their hands were red. I clapped too, though my palms felt heavy. Every sound from the crowd another reminder of the shadow I could never escape. After the ceremony, the real spectacle began. Our family hosted a reception in a lavish New York ballroom. Chandeliers glowed above polished wooden floors that reflected golden light across tuxedos and gowns. Luxury cars lined the entrance, valets darting back and forth. Guests poured in: business leaders, politicians, socialites, all gathered not just to celebrate Darren's graduation, but to witness the official announcement of his inheritance. I tried to fade into the background, standing near a wall behind towering vases of lilies. People glanced at me briefly, some whispering, "That must be the other son." The words stung more than outright insults, because they carried the truth of how I was seen, a footnote. Then came the moment I had dreaded. My father climbed onto the stage, microphone in hand, voice booming across the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us to honor my brilliant son Darren Vale." Applause erupted. Darren stood near the front, grinning as though he were already crowned. Victor continued, his speech swelling with grandeur. "The Vale family has built more than a company, we have built a legacy. Tonight I am proud to announce that Darren will inherit that legacy. The company, valued at $75 million, the mansion in New York and the brand new Tesla outside all belong to him. He is the future of our family." The crowd cheered louder than ever. Glasses clinked, laughter rang out, and I sat in silence. My mother walked past me, pausing just long enough to whisper sharply, "At least don't ruin this day for your brother. Keep to yourself." Then she returned to the stage, beaming as if nothing had been said. At the back of the room, I clenched my fists beneath the table. Rage and sorrow battled in my chest. Once again I was erased in front of everyone. To them I wasn't even a disappointment anymore, I was nothing. Darren basked in the spotlight. My father radiated pride, and my mother glowed with satisfaction. I sat in the shadows, wishing the night would end. But then something unusual cut through the celebration. A man I had never seen before moved through the crowd. He didn't clap, didn't smile, didn't toast Darren's achievements. His eyes were fixed on me alone, sharp and unflinching. He wove past guests, as though none of them mattered. His focus locked like a hunter closing in on a target. By the time he reached my table, the room felt colder. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit that fit with precision, his expression unreadable. Without a word of introduction, he bent slightly, slid a thick white envelope onto the polished wood, and leaned down so close I could feel his breath against my ear. "It's time to tell them who you really are," he whispered. His tone was deliberate, almost commanding, as though this wasn't a suggestion but an instruction. Before I could respond, he straightened his jacket, gave me the smallest nod and walked away. He vanished into the sea of tuxedos and gowns, leaving me frozen with the envelope resting in front of me. My hands trembled as I slid it onto my lap, shielding it from curious eyes. My heart pounded so violently I thought the sound might draw attention. For years, no one had ever hinted that I could be more than the family's disappointment. Now this stranger had placed a mystery in my hands, with words that challenged everything I believed. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the flap. A part of me feared it was a cruel trick, one last humiliation in a life already defined by them. But another part, the part that still clung to my grandfather's words, urged me forward. "One day, the truth will set you free." I tore the inside were several documents bound together, heavy with official stamps and signatures. My eyes darted across the first page, and I froze. My name was there, not scribbled as an afterthought, but written boldly, legally. The pages detailed shares of the Vale Company, ownership of the New York mansion, and accounts I'd never heard of, all placed under my name. My breath caught as I reached the final page, a transfer of authority signed years earlier by my grandfather, Eldon. My hands shook harder as I unfolded a handwritten letter tucked inside. The familiar curves of Eldon's handwriting leapt from the page. "Aaron, if you are reading this, it means the time has come. I chose you, not for brilliance or perfection, but for resilience, humility and heart. Everything I built belongs to you. Do not doubt yourself any longer." I stared until the words blurred. My grandfather had chosen me. For the first time in my life, I held proof that I wasn't invisible. I was the heir. The music swelled in the ballroom, glasses clinked, and guests toasted Darren as if the world belonged to him. But my focus never left the envelope, pressed against my chest. The papers inside weren't just documents. They were freedom, the truth my family had denied me all my life. My grandfather's words echoed louder than the music. "Do not doubt yourself any longer." I rose from my chair. My legs wavered at first, but my resolve solidified with each step toward the stage. Heads turned. Whispers followed. My father's frown deepened as he spotted me approaching, clearly annoyed at what he thought was an interruption. Darren smirked, certain I was there to play my usual role, the silent brother offering hollow congratulations. My mother shook her head subtly, her eyes sharp with warning, as though daring me to ruin her perfect evening. But this time, I wouldn't shrink back. I climbed the steps, heart pounding like a war drum. My father leaned into the microphone, his forced smile masking irritation. "Aaron, this is not your moment," he muttered under his breath, hoping no one else would hear. I gripped the microphone. My voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. "Actually, Father, this moment belongs to me." The ballroom froze. Glasses hovered in midair. Conversations died mid-sentence. Darren's grin faltered as silence swept across the room. For the first time, all eyes were on me. I pulled the documents from my jacket and held them high enough for the crowd to see. My voice carried farther than I thought possible. "You've all been told tonight that Darren is the future of this family. But these papers prove otherwise. My grandfather, Eldon Vale, signed a transfer years ago. The company, the mansion, the accounts, all of it was placed in my name." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Darren laughed nervously, trying to turn it into a joke. Sit down, Aaron, before you embarrass yourself. But I didn't move. My hands were steady now. No, I said firmly. For years I've been silent while you mocked me. For years I've been told I was nothing. Tonight that ends. The truth belongs to me, and so does this legacy. My father's face burned red with fury as he stepped closer, his voice sharp and low. Give me those papers. This is ridiculous. Eldon didn't know what he was doing when he signed. He reached forward, but I pulled the pages closer to my chest. I'm not the one embarrassing myself, I said, locking eyes with him. You are. The ballroom erupted with shocked murmur. Guests leaned forward, craning their necks to glimpse the seal of the Veil Company stamped across the documents. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't Krishik. It was mine. The ballroom buzzed with disbelief. Some guests whispered. Others craned their necks to catch sight of the documents in my hands. My father's fury radiated off him like heat. Darren's smug expression cracked, replaced with unease he couldn't hide. For the first time, I felt the balance of the room tilt, not toward them, but toward me. Then a voice, steady and commanding, cut through the chaos. I knew exactly what I was doing. Every head turned. My grandfather, Eldon Vale, rose slowly from his chair near the front. He leaned on his cane, yet his presence carried more weight than anyone else in the room. Each tap of his cane against the polished floor echoed louder than the applause had minutes earlier. He reached the stage, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. His gaze swept across the crowd, silencing them completely. I gave these papers to a man I trusted, to deliver them when the time was right. That time is now. I chose Aaron. Gasps spread like wildfire. Darren stepped forward, his voice cracking with desperation. Grandfather, you can't mean that. I've done everything to make you proud. I'm the one who earned this. Eldon's eyes softened, though his tone stayed firm. You've achieved much, Darren. But achievement alone is not leadership. Brilliance without humility is arrogant. I will not leave this family's future in the hands of pride. My father's composure fractured. He clenched his fists, his voice rising. You'd give everything to the boy who failed. To the one who never lived up to the Vale name. Eldon turned to him, his reply sharp as steel. I am giving everything to the man who will redefine what the Vale name means. You built wealth, Victor, but you lost compassion. Darren carries your brilliance, but also your vanity. Aaron has endured neglect and cruelty, yet he has not hardened his heart. That is strength. That is legacy. The room erupted again. Murmurs. Disbelief. Astonishment. Darren's face paled as the smirk drained away. My mother stood frozen, her perfect smile shattered. Eldon lifted his cane, pointing toward me. This family will change starting tonight. The company is no longer a monument to ego. It will be a foundation for people, and Aaron is the one to lead it. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of being seen, truly seen, not as the dumb one, not as the shadow, but as the heir my grandfather had always believed I could be. I turned to face the guests, my voice steady now. All my life, I've been told I was nothing. Tonight, you see the truth. My grandfather believed in me when no one else did. I won't waste what he entrusted to me. Applause rippled cautiously, then grew stronger, filling the room with a sound I had never known: recognition. His jaw clenched, his face flushed red, and his voice dropped low, laced with venom. This is not the end, he hissed. You have no idea what you're getting into. Then he turned sharply, his polished shoes striking the floor like gunshots, as he stormed out. My mother followed close behind, her eyes avoiding mine, her carefully painted smile gone. For years she had clung to the illusion of a perfect family. In one night, that illusion shattered in front of the very people she lived to impress. Darren didn't move. He remained rooted in place, his glass still raised in a toast that no longer mattered. His shoulders stiffened, and his knuckles whitened around the stem. When he finally spoke, his words dripped with bitterness. You don't deserve this, he spat. You're nothing compared to me. For the first time in my life, I met his eyes without flinching. Maybe I'm not what you think I should be, but I am what grandfather believes I can be. That's more than enough. His face twisted, caught between rage and fear. Fear, because the foundation of his superiority had cracked. For years he had ruled over me with effortless arrogance, but now he stood exposed, powerless before the truth. The guests murmured among themselves, their gazes shifting from Darren's trembling defiance to my grandfather's steady presence. Eldon lifted his cane and spoke again, his voice unwavering. This family will not be built on vanity anymore. The company is in Aaron's hands, and for once, those hands belong to someone who knows what it is to be overlooked. That is why he will lead. Darren's protest died in his throat. He looked at me with eyes that no longer carried triumph, but desperation. The golden son, the prodigy, the heir reduced to silence by the very man who had once celebrated him above all else. The ballroom felt transformed. Guests who once dismissed me as a footnote now regarded me differently. Some still looked doubtful, others intrigued, but no one could deny what they had witnessed. The truth had been revealed, and it could not be taken back. I held the documents firmly against my chest. For years, I had been told I was worthless. Tonight I stood as the rightful heir, not because of brilliance polished by privilege, but because of resilience forged in silence. The applause returned, stronger this time, drowning out the last fragments of doubt. Darren lowered his gaze, his shoulders sagging. For the first time he had no words, no smirk, no shield. He wasn't the one feared anymore. I was, and in that moment, under the glow of the chandeliers, I realized something profound. I had never been the family's failure. I had only been waiting for the truth to finally set me free. The applause spread across the ballroom like a wave, hesitant at first, but then stronger, fuller, impossible to name. It wasn't for Darren. It wasn't for my father. For the first time, it was for me. The sound filled spaces inside me that had long been hollow, washing away years of silence. My father was gone. My mother had followed. But my grandfather stood tall beside me. Though age had bent his back and slowed his steps, his presence commanded more authority than anyone else in the room. He raised his voice above the clapping. Tonight marks a turning point. For too long, this family's pride has been built on arrogance. That ends now. Aaron will carry the Vale name forward. Not because of privilege, but because of strength born from being overlooked. His words struck the room with the weight of truth. Guests exchanged glances, some shocked, others impressed. Those who had dismissed me as the forgotten son now saw me as the chosen heir. I felt their eyes on me, not with pity, but with recognition. My grandfather's hand pressed firmly on my shoulder, grounding me. "The company is yours now," he said quietly, but his words carried into me like fire. "It's a burden, yes, but also a gift. Use it well." The responsibility settled heavy on my chest. Running a $75 million empire was more than I had ever imagined. Yet for the first time, the weight didn't crush me. It lifted me. Because now, I wasn't fighting to prove I belonged. I had already been chosen. Darren stood off the side, his glass lowered, his posture stiff. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of the confidence that had once made him untouchable. When his eyes met mine, they no longer carried superiority. They carried fear. I turned back to the audience, speaking with a voice I didn't recognize as my own. Steady, bold, alive. "All my life I've been told I was nothing. Tonight you've seen my father declare it again. But here, in my hands, is proof that my grandfather believed otherwise. He saw in me what no one else would. I won't waste that trust. I'll honor this legacy by building people, not just profit." The room erupted again, applause stronger than before. Some guests stood, clapping with genuine admiration. Others nodded thoughtfully, as though reassessing the story they had believed for years. In that moment I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the dumb one. I was Aaron Vale, the chosen heir. My grandfather leaned closer, his voice low enough only I could hear. "Now show them why I was right." I straightened, no longer weighed down by doubt. For the first time, I saw my future not as a shadow of Darren's, but as my own. The boy who had sat at the far end of the table was gone. The man standing on the stage was ready to lead. When the last of the applause faded, the ballroom felt transformed. No longer was it the stage of Darren's triumph. It had become the birthplace of my own. My father's shadow no longer stretched across the room. My mother's cold whispers no longer defined me. Darren's smirk, once a weapon, was gone. What remained was silence, filled with the undeniable truth. Everything had changed. Later that night, after the crowd thinned and the chandeliers dimmed, I stepped outside. The New York air was crisp, carrying the hum of the city. The skyline glittered, towers stretching into the darkness like promises written in light. For years I had looked at those lights as if they belonged to a world closed off to me. Now, they felt different. They felt like an invitation. I stood there, breathing in deeply, thinking of the boy I once was. The one seated at the far end of the table, mocked for every word, dismissed with every glance. I thought of the nights I worked in silence, stacking boxes and washing dishes, believing those efforts meant nothing. I thought of every cruel laugh, every comparison, every sigh of disappointment. All of it had shaped me, but none of it defined me anymore. My grandfather joined me, leaning on his cane, his presence steady as the city lights reflected in his eyes. "You see it now, don't you?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said. "I see it clearly." He smiled, the corners of his face creasing with quiet pride. "Then carry it well. The future is yours." The words sank into me with a weight both terrifying and liberating. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the responsibility. I welcomed it, because my life was no longer about trying to be Darren, or earning scraps of love from parents who never gave it freely. It was about stepping into a role I was always meant to claim. I realized then that being underestimated had been my greatest advantage. While Darren was polished, praised, and paraded, I was tested in silence. While he was groomed for success, I was forged in neglect. What they thought was weakness had built a strength they could never imagine. I looked back at the ballroom through the tall glass doors. Inside, guests still lingered, their conversations buzzing with the story they would tell tomorrow. They hadn't just witnessed Darren's celebration. They had witnessed my transformation. The city stretched before me, alive with opportunity. For the first time, I felt I belonged not at the edge, but at the center. The lights no longer mocked me. They called to me. I straightened my shoulders, inhaled the cool night air, and whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." The forgotten sun was gone. The chosen heir had arrived. As I stood outside, the city lights stretching across the skyline, I realized my story wasn't just about me. It was about anyone who has ever been dismissed, mocked, or told they were less. For years, I believed the labels stamped on me: the dumb one, the failure, the shadow. Those words nearly defined my life. But tonight proved something greater. The truth cannot stay buried forever. To those listening now, I want to speak directly to you. Maybe you've been underestimated. Maybe you've been told you'll never measure up, that someone else will always outshine you. Maybe you felt invisible at your own table, silenced by the very people who should have lifted you high. If that's you, then hear this clearly. Your worth is not decided by their judgment. Their blindness is not your truth. I spent years working jobs no one respected, enduring laughs that cut deeper than insults, swallowing pride because it felt safer than speaking. But those experiences shaped me. They gave me resilience, humility, and strength no one in my family saw coming. And when the moment finally arrived, I was ready. Not because of recognition, but because of everything I had endured in silence. Your moment will come too. Maybe not with an envelope delivered at a grand celebration, maybe not with papers proving inheritance, but it will come in a way that reveals who you truly are. And when it does, the voices that tried to bury you will no longer matter. The truth will speak louder than every insult, every sigh, every comparison. I share this story not for sympathy, but for hope. If you've ever felt like nothing, remember this: being overlooked does not make you worthless. Sometimes it prepares you to rise in ways no one expects. The strongest leaders aren't always the ones praised from birth. They're the ones forged in silence, tested by cruelty and hardened by neglect, yet still capable of choosing compassion over bitterness. So take my story as proof. The forgotten son became the chosen heir, not because he was perfect, but because he endured. And so can you. If this story touched you, I ask one thing. Share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their silence, their pain, their invisibility does not define them. Comment below and tell me what part resonated with you most. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories that reveal strength where no one expected it, subscribe to the channel, because together we can rewrite the narrative. We can prove that the ones who were laughed at, silenced, or ignored are not weak. They are the ones destined to rise. Thank you for listening. Remember this, your time will come, and when it does, the truth will set you free.